So, friends, we remain on Vindictive Prosecution watch. First, former FBI Director James Comey was vindictively indicted by Donald Trump, Pam Bondi, and Lindsay Halligan. Then, New York State Attorney General Letitia James was vindictively indicted. And now, based on some new reporting, it looks like John Bolton, Donald Trump's former national security advisor, may be on deck for the next vindictive prosecution. And friends, let's not forget Abrego Garcia. He is in the midst of litigating his vindictive prosecution claim in the trumped-up criminal case that they brought against him down in Tennessee. But let's turn for a minute to the new reporting regarding the prospect of John Bolton being vindictively prosecuted. This from CNN. Headline, Federal prosecutors meeting this weekend to finalize potential Bolton indictment. Federal prosecutors are meeting on Saturday to finalize the details of a potential indictment against former National Security Advisor John Bolton, who has been under criminal investigation for years relating to his handling of national security information, according to a source familiar with the investigation. Prosecutors, federal prosecutors, in the Maryland U.S. Attorney's Office previously pushed back against Justice Department political leadership from the Deputy Attorney General's office, who wanted Bolton to be charged late last month. The prosecutors had sought more time to firm up a case by the end of the year. But as of Saturday, the Maryland-based team of federal prosecutors has lifted their objections and are working on the charges this weekend. So, based on that reporting, it sounds like the federal prosecutors at the Maryland U.S. Attorney's Office maybe had some concerns, some hesitation even, about indicting John Bolton, but then political pressure was applied by the leadership at the Department of Justice, and lo and behold, those prosecutors started working on an indictment. Sounds a little vindictive-ish. So friends, I just sat down to discuss all of this with my friend Asha Rangappa. Asha is an attorney. She's a former FBI agent. She is a lecturer at Yale University's Jackson School of Global Affairs, and she has some terrific insights, particularly about the Bolton case, but also about these vindictive prosecutions writ large. So I hope you enjoy this deep dive, this extended conversation with my friend Asha Rangappa. Let's get started. I will introduce my friend, Asha Rangappa, an attorney, a former FBI agent, former associate dean at Yale Law School. And check me on this one, Asha, currently assistant dean of admissions and senior lecturer at Yale University's Jackson School of Global Affairs.
I am now only a senior lecturer. So I'm only teaching, which is great because I'm also writing a book. So I now have the time to do that.
Okay. Topic of the book is?
Complicity. How it works and how you avoid it.
Wow, that's a big topic, complicity, given what's going on in the executive branch.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
good, I'll look forward to that. You see Asha on MSNBC, you see her on CNN, and you see her on Substack. And I would urge you to subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Her page is called The Freedom Academy with Asha Rangappa. And I last talked with her, we last saw her here when we were discussing a great deep dive piece she did on the backstory regarding John Bolton, how he wrote a book, how he may have disclosed some classified information in the book, but boy, there's a lot more to the story, and I'm going to link that article in my Substack here. But first of all, welcome back, Asha. I'm so thrilled to have you to kind of give us an update on where we are with John Bolton.
Yeah, so, I have to be honest, I think you got me up to speed on what's happening with John Bolton 'cause, I'm teaching today, and I was not totally on top of this, but it sounds like they are on the brink of, indicting him. We're basically in indictment watch again, now, except instead of for Trump as it was a few years ago, it's now for all of Trump's enemies. And this is very interesting because, as you highlighted when we were chatting, his lawyer has basically fronted this, the fact that there was classified information found in his possession. We don't know what kind of classified information. Just so people know, there's three main classifications. There's confidential, there's secret, there's top secret. Things are classified based on the damage they can do to national security if they are disclosed. Obviously, it is against the law to retain without any authorization classified information. So this is bad. We've seen people in the recent years, from Trump to even Biden, have this. So yeah, it's not great for him.
It's bad, but not all that unusual, right? I mean, I think we probably talked about how General Petraeus also, got caught in possession or disseminating some classified information as part of writing his book. And he ended up being criminally investigated. He pleaded guilty to, I believe, 2 misdemeanor counts and served 6 months of probation. And I will say, at least back then, I didn't have an inkling that that had anything to do with politics. It looked like a former high government official, a military general, director of the CIA, who had some stuff he shouldn't have had. And we've heard a lot about that. As you mentioned, Joe Biden had some. And so let me just read for our viewers here what CNN reported, and then we'll use that as kind of a jumping off point to talk about, okay, what may happen next to John Bolton. The headline from CNN a day or two ago, maybe yesterday, prosecutors in the Maryland U.S. Attorney's Office previously pushed back against Justice Department political leadership from the Deputy Attorney General's office, who wanted Bolton to be charged last month. The prosecutors had sought more time to firm up a case by the end of the year, but as of Saturday, the Maryland-based team, the federal prosecutors, has lifted their objections and are working on charges this weekend, according to CNN's reporting. And then as you kind of work through that CNN article, this is the thing that caught my attention. A spokesman for Bolton declined to comment, but Abby Lowell, Bolton's lawyer, has maintained he did nothing inappropriate with classified records and said that the records with classified markings found in Bolton's possession during a recent search were decades old. Asha, given that it is a federal crime to unlawfully retain classified information, that sounded like a tell. It sounded like Abby Lowell trying to get in front of and maybe minimize the damage that will be done to his client as a result of these documents being found and seized during the execution of a search warrant.
Yeah, so I'm also reading from CNN, and it says federal investigators seized multiple documents labeled secret, confidential, and classified, including some about weapons of mass destruction. And this was from the August search that they did. They took 4 computers, USB flash drive, and other devices labeled as referring to, quote, Allied strikes and, quote, Trump 1 through 4. So I guess where I'm trying to understand, and maybe this doesn't matter really for the retention, because the retention is really about the time that he's retaining it, not the time of the document. But it does sound like this could include documents from like when he was in the Bush administration, right? Because he was the national security advisor for Bush. I can't remember.
I know he was for Trump. I forget what his position was in the Bush.
I forget what his position was for George W. But it also sounds like if there's something labeled Trump 1 through 4, it could be that it's also related to his book. And the book was the piece that was sort of front and center, right? So this is kind of what got this whole ball rolling. That it was a book very critical of Trump. he went through pre-publication review. It was happening pretty much on, standard procedure with some career official looking through it and saying, hey, you got some stuff that here that's classified. You got to clean this up, take it out, blah, blah, blah. And then a guy named Michael Ellis, a political appointee, inserted himself into that process, jammed it up, so he never fully got the publication, the clearance to publish the book. He did anyway. So I think we thought the last time we talked that this could be about the publication of the book, and I think what you're suggesting is it's worse than that. Because there could have been some plausible defense about the publication of the book because he had sort of been cleared, but not, really, etc. But these are actual documents that go beyond the scope of the book itself.
So this seems to both potentially expand his criminal exposure and freshen it up considerably if they seize documents from his home that, let's just say, he may have been unlawfully retaining, even if they're old, even if they're so old they no longer compromise our national security. It still may be a criminal problem for him. I remember when we talked last time about the litigation over his book, and there was a lot of back and forth, and you brought a lot of interesting facts and some intrigue as to whether maybe the Trump administration was playing games by reclassifying something that had been cleared to jam Bolton up. We didn't know that, but there were some hints of that. And I remember the hypercritical language from Judge Royce Lamberth about how, John Bolton may very well have exposed himself not only to, civil liability, but maybe even criminal liability. But now we're seeing that there really may be a little bit more meat on the evidentiary bones for them to go after John Bolton.
And this, it sounds like, and I didn't get to do a full deep dive, but it sounds like some of the evidence that they've recovered is based on intelligence that the CIA got of a hack that a foreign adversary had done of Bolton's devices. So I think so just to kind of follow the chain of custody here, Bolton has these documents presumably on his computer. Russia, China, Iran, not really clear. One of them, they think it might be Iran, and that could make sense because Iran, I think, also wanted to assassinate John Bolton, along with some other senior officials. Hacked his computer, and I guess the CIA, in some sort of counterintelligence operation, must have discovered that this adversary had hacked him and had these, and I guess then had intelligence that he possessed these particular documents. Then the CIA shared that with the FBI, which is really interesting because there are rules, but more relaxed rules now post 9/11 about the CIA sharing intelligence that it's collected with the FBI, because, you're kind of, that's a little bit of a workaround, from a Fourth Amendment perspective, right? But that's, you've all heard about the wall after 9/11 and the wall came down. Well, that's part of the wall coming down. So this then gets passed over to the FBI, which is what leads to the physical search of his premises. So I think that's a very interesting little, angle as well. This idea that CIA had gotten heads up that he had some of this information because of some intelligence or counterintelligence operation they did based on an adversary's hack of his computer.
And you took the phrase right out of my mouth, Fourth Amendment workaround, because, the Fourth Amendment, which is my favorite amendment, right? The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. So usually the police, whether it's local law enforcement or the FBI, a federal agency, needs probable cause. They need to have come into the information and evidence that they're going to use as the basis to try to obtain a search warrant. They need to have come into it lawfully. So, if we don't know exactly how this will play out when things are revealed, if evidence is revealed, but, you have foreign bad actors who are hacking into the computers of U.S. citizens, delivering those sort of ill-gotten gains to U.S. law enforcement for U.S. law enforcement to use it against the citizen, that gets really ugly. We'll have to see if that's the way this played out. So let's do this. I would love to have your take on the vindictive prosecution defenses that, what is now a hat trick of indicted Trump enemies, soon to be a hat trick if Bolton is indicted, the defenses that they may have based on vindictive prosecution. In recent days, I've been talking about how all vindictive prosecution defenses are not created equal. All three of the folks, James Comey, Letitia James, and Bolton, if he's indicted, may try to present a vindictive prosecution defense. Doesn't mean they will all be winning. And I see kind of a sliding scale of the strength of these vindictive prosecution defenses kind of among these three defendants. But how do you see that?
So the vindictive prosecution standard. So I know with selective prosecution, you have to show that people who are similarly situated have not been prosecuted. I think that's a very, very hard thing to show because you have prosecutorial discretion, and there's invariably people who may, under similar circumstances, who might not be. The vindictiveness, you have to show the motivation, right, of the prosecutor that is actually going after you. So theoretically, it seems like the merits of the actual case ought to not be as important. But I think what you're suggesting is you can't help but make it a part of it, right? Because if it is a squarely colorable prosecution on the facts, then it's much harder to dismiss. And I think that the slidings, I agree with you on that front. I mean, it seems like this will be a harder case for Bolton to make if there were actual classified documents. I think the weakest one might be Comey. And then after that, Letitia James. I need to understand more about Letitia James. It sounds like this will turn on the meaning of some rider in her mortgage agreement and how she used the property. It seems a little flimsy to me, but the Comey one on its face just seems dumb.
I agree that the Comey, at least based on public reporting and a review of the indictment and those people who have been willing to make statements publicly like Andy McCabe, the Comey case, it seems like he may not have even lied to Congress based on what we know. And the reason I say I believe that the strength of the evidence is inextricably intertwined with the strength of the vindictive prosecution defense. Because if you, and we'll get to selective in a minute, but if you committed no crime, but you're being prosecuted because Donald Trump doesn't like you, that's pretty damn vindictive, right? I mean, that's like the mother of all vindictive prosecution defenses. However, if you may have technically violated a law, and we don't know if Letitia James played any games in her loan paperwork. If she did, I'm not saying she did, but if she did, if she actually said, you know what, I'm applying for this loan because I intend to use the house as a second residence versus I'm applying for this loan because I intend to use the house as a rental property. The indictment suggests and lays out that there would be two different interest rates. And all they actually allege, Asha, I've read it so many times because it's a really poorly drafted indictment.
Very poorly
and I'm trying to make heads or tails out of it. But all it alleges is that there is now a family of three living in it. We don't know if she changed her decision about how to use the property long after she acquired the loan. We don't know any of this. Here's what we do know based on the numbers they put in the indictment. They say over the life of the loan, because she would have had a slightly higher interest rate if she filled out her paperwork saying it's going to be a rental property, over the life of I'm assuming it's a 30-year loan, but they don't say that, I think intentionally. Over the life of the loan, you know what she would have defrauded the bank out of?
It's like $50 a month.
$52.77 a month. You know the saying, don't make a federal case out of it? It's kind of the poster child for it. That may go more to a selective prosecution than a vindictive prosecution, but I think she also has a pretty compelling vindictive prosecution claim just because of what Trump has said and posted about her over the years.
Yeah, I think she has a couple of strong defenses there. I mean, number one, even on just the paltry amount that she was defrauding the bank, I think that also gets to the intent. Like, in other words, if you're really trying to scam, like, I don't know, like, there's kind of a go big or go home. I don't think that many people would be making those kind of misrepresentations, like, intentionally for that little money per month. But what's more interesting, Glenn, and I posted about this in my Substack roundup this past Saturday, is that the writer, they actually quote verbatim in the indictment, Fannie Mae in 2019, a year before, all this took place, actually clarified that it does permit renting. It just doesn't permit you handing it over to a management company. In other words, you could, if you were doing it on Airbnb for a short period of time, et cetera. So, like the amount of money that they also claim that she got in rental income based on her tax returns is like $5,000. So anyway, I'm not really seeing this, but like you said, you can't make out on the face. The Comey thing is really dumb because the Comey allegation is that he disagreed with us, or there was the quote that is in the indictment is a quote from Ted Cruz.
But they write it as if they attribute those words to him.
Correct.
And that's dirty. That's dirty.
Correct. They are. It's like you read it really quickly, and it does a Jedi mind trick as though he said those words, and he didn't say those words. It's Ted Cruz says those words, and then he says, like, I can't recall, or no, I stand by my original testimony or something like that. So it's sort of like, what are you even alleging here?
Yeah.
And so to me, I think also, Glenn, I wonder if you agree that this will depend also on whether, even in the James and Comey cases, it's a question of law or fact on whether they committed a crime. Because if it's a matter of law, like you just allege something that he didn't say on the face of the indictment, and that's not, in other words, if it can be dismissed as a matter of law, like that's a stronger case too, to me, than if it's like, oh, we need this to go to a jury to figure out.
Sure. If it's a matter of law, the judge should resolve it in a motions hearing and dismiss it. I would guess if a judge finds it was vindictive, it would be dismissed with prejudice. So it could never be rebrought. If it is a question of fact about whether he violated the law or not, that's probably going to end up going to a jury unless the judge believes that either the abuse of the grand jury or the potentially illegal appointment of Lindsay Halligan or the vindictiveness was such outrageous government misconduct that outweighs some lingering question of fact. I think that is within the judge's discretion to resolve and to grant the motion to dismiss. And then I think with Bolton now, I believe all three of these defendants, assuming Bolton gets, I shouldn't be indicting John Bolton until he's actually indicted. So two defendants and John Bolton. I think they'll all have vindictive prosecution motions, straight-faced motions, maybe not winning motions. Part of it is that the prosecutors reportedly in all three cases had previously decided we're not going to indict these people. Now, we all know that new administrations can come in and they can give investigations a second look, as long as they don't do it vindictively or for political purposes. But I do think when you have a team of career civil servants, federal prosecutors, who give a case an honest look and say, we're not going to indict it, I think the most important question behind that is, did they decide they weren't going to indict it because nobody committed a crime? There was no crime? Or did they decide not to indict it because maybe the injury was de minimis? So they're like, this is not a federal case. I think that will color the vindictive prosecution defense. But, where do you see Bolton kind of falling out on this scale that we've been discussing?
Yeah. So a few things. Just to kind of once again put this in the context of the different ones, as you noted, Halligan brought the one for Comey and Letitia James after other prosecutors basically refused to. And in the Letitia James case, she had actually presented evidence to a different grand jury. Not clear whether she actually sought an indictment, but that particular grand jury she presented exculpatory evidence, and then went to this other grand jury in Virginia and didn't present that exculpatory evidence. I don't know to what degree that plays in. That seems really hinky to me, and it seems unethical, and it seems like I believe it goes against the Justice Manual as well, that you can't go grand jury shopping and kind of select, then tweak the evidence that you're presenting until you finally find a grand jury that will give you an indictment. I think one thing that is another uphill battle for John Bolton, is that my understanding is that although this case was opened under Trump 1, it actually continued for some time under Biden. In other words, they didn't immediately look at it and roll their eyes and say, okay, case closed. They eventually did. I don't know if actually, I'm not sure. I don't know if they closed it or if they soft closed it or something like that. But my point is that investigation did bleed into the Biden administration. And I think that is something that might go against this idea that it was a concern for the Biden Justice Department too. They were looking into it. They didn't, ever bring charges. That's another potential problem that I see for him.
I agree. If the Biden administration and the federal prosecutors who were continuing to look into Bolton's potential crimes thought, you know what, we need to keep this investigation going because it may be that he should be prosecuted, that militates against a winning vindictive prosecution claim, I would think. So, I think Bolton's prospects of getting the case dismissed prior to a jury trial on either vindictive or selective prosecution, based on what little we know right now, is probably slim.
But the one other thing that I will say that might benefit all of these defendants is the Justice Department has just lost tremendous credibility with courts across the board, even outside of these cases. So we know that, for example, in the migrants case, there have been 2 different contempt proceedings that commenced. One definitely that went through Boasberg, and then I think there was another one that might have been threatened. I'm not sure if it went. She actually held a hearing. We know that in the deployment of federal troops, we've had judges saying, hey, we don't believe that the information you're providing is reliable.
Yeah.
We can't believe you. And this is even a Trump appointed judge in Portland who's saying this, that you're untethered to the facts. And so there is a way in which, this is one of the costs for the government, is that when you go around playing shenanigans in federal court, you lose a certain, we talked about this last time, the presumption of regularity, that you're coming to these decisions in an honest and forthcoming way. So I don't know how that will work in a vindictive prosecution. I mean, is a vindictive prosecution defense or a motion to dismiss based on it? Could there be some sort of hearing that a judge could have? Is that what would happen?
And there was a hearing in the Abrego Garcia criminal prosecution in North Carolina on Friday on the issue of vindictive prosecution.
Yes.
The Judge Crenshaw, I believe, had already ruled that there was enough evidence that suggested Abrego Garcia may be being prosecuted vindictively, and he was allowing discovery. He was going to hold a hearing. He has now held one hearing. So I agree that, listen, the Trump administration and the Department of Justice does not deserve the presumption of regularity. If anything, they deserve a presumption of irregularity based on what federal judges, including Trump-appointed judges, have been finding regarding their lack of candor, regarding Judge Immergut out in Oregon, saying Donald Trump's assertions are, quote, untethered to the facts. You don't ordinarily hear federal court judges talking like that.
No, definitely. She's a conservative judge. I mean, that has to be she must be walking out of her courtroom every day, looking at the streets of Portland and just saying, I don't know what you're talking about. So it gets also to the loss of credibility of the government when it comes to people getting on the stand. The government witnesses, the FBI agents. I mean, it's terrible because I think it can have spillover effects to cases that we want to see succeed against people that really can't, have have committed crimes. And, I try to explain that about the loss of credibility of the Justice Department and the FBI to people about, the long-term costs of that. But yeah, I'm also wondering what you think about if there are like all these vindictive prosecution claims that end up, even if some of them are successful, at what point are there costs for the attorneys that have their names on these? Like both Lindsay Halligan and Pam Bondi. I mean, there has to be some cost or disincentive to bringing this, right? And I know that the bar is very, no pun intended, the bar is very high, but it's not impossible. And especially when you have tremendous responsibility like these people do.
Look at the group of disbarred former Trump lawyers. Rudy Giuliani, John Eastman, Jeffrey Clark, Kenneth Chesebro are all, I believe, disbarred. Some may technically still be pending a final result in their disbarment. But, I know there have already been bar council referrals to state bar of, I believe, Lindsay Halligan, certainly of Pam Bondi down in Florida. And the challenge for these lawyers who are willing to go into court in all of this Trump related litigation and argue in a very real sense that Donald Trump's unlawful acts are lawful and his unconstitutional acts are constitutional. And over again, the judges are calling them out and saying, you're an officer of the court, which is a catchphrase or a buzz phrase for the judge saying, I don't believe you. You're not being candid. You're not being straight. You're making misrepresentations. Anytime a federal judge says that about a DOJ lawyer, that person will end up being referred to bar counsel by someone. Ordinarily, they would also be referred to the Office of Professional Responsibility, OPR, which is the ethics oversight component of the Department of Justice. But that is now a dead organization because they pulled the chief of OPR, Jeff Ragsdale, former colleague of mine for many years. They pulled him out, walked him out. Why? Because he was kind of an honest broker of the facts and the law. And there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of internal oversight left at the Department of Justice. But you're exactly right. These people, and you know what, Asha, these people are like political appointees or very high up the food chain at the Department of Justice, people who are walking into court. Why? Because they can't get rank and
No one else
file
will do it.
career public servants to go in and risk their license to practice law. So I don't believe this is sustainable. I think you're going to reach a point of diminishing returns where people aren't going to be willing to go into court and continue to do the dirty work of Pam Bondi and Donald Trump.
And this is, I think, really where, there are a lot of things that are eroding. I know everything feels like it's falling apart. I do feel like the rule of law it's still holding. It's eroding. I mean, we don't want, people bringing frivolous prosecutions, but at the end of the day, we have to remember that Trump is doing a typical authoritarian ploy, which is presenting loyalty tests. So, bringing these prosecutions, even if they're meritless, are a loyalty test for the people in the Justice Department, in the FBI. And the challenge is that our courts of law demand loyalty to the Constitution, to the truth, to the rule of law. And so these people are coming in, and when these judges are reprimanding them, they are basically reminding them that their loyalty is not to Trump and that there are costs to not being loyal to their professional ethics. So, how this is going to play out, I'm not sure. But I think for Trump, I will say this, Glenn, I don't know that he truly cares if these are actually successful prosecutions. Because one thing, remember with the Zelensky perfect phone call, what he wanted was Zelensky to get on television on CNN and announce that the Bidens were being investigated. It didn't matter whether they were actually going to be investigated or whatever happened. And what we're seeing is, I think Trump wants these people indicted. I think he wants a perp walk. I just saw some reporting that, they're talking about a perp walk for Bolton. Maybe you can talk about why we don't do those, or whether I think the Justice Manual has something to say about those, but I don't know that he really cares after that, because I think after that he can forever say they were indicted too. In other words, it's a way to create an equivalency to essentially reduce and remove the stain on himself.
Exactly. And I agree he cares less about the result, though he would love to see these people in a jumpsuit,
Of course.
convicted of a crime. But here's where I think it's, and maybe we can end on this. Here's why I think the result will be so important, because Donald Trump, for 10 years now, starting with Hillary Clinton, lock her up, lock her up, lock her up, he's been threatening to prosecute his enemies. He has never done it until now. And I think part of the reason is, well, in the first administration, he had some adults around him who were kind of controlling him or trying to. Second administration, all of the adults are gone and they're nothing but yes men and women. So he's succeeded in getting some vindictive indictments. But I think it's so important that the system, the criminal justice system, the judges and the juries rise up, announce loud and clear, whether through a motion to dismiss or a not guilty verdict, this is stone cold abuse of government power, and we will not stand for it. And as these people either have their cases thrown out or are found not guilty, that will reduce Donald Trump's ability to frighten people and intimidate them, because they'll see he's a paper tiger. He can threaten vindictive indictments all day long, but he can't follow through on it. I actually think Jimmy Kimmel was an important data point for just how ineffective a dictator Donald Trump is. He desperately wanted Kimmel off air permanently. He couldn't keep Jimmy Kimmel off air for 1 week. You're not very good at this dictating stuff, sport, if you can't keep a comedian off of TV for a week. And now I think we're going to see his weakness similarly exposed as these vindictive prosecutions work their way through the system.
Yeah, and I think it's another reminder that ultimately the power is with us. It's these grand juries, petite juries, judges, and in many ways, some of these things that get dismissed or not even brought if grand juries don't agree or whatever. We have a lot of loss of faith in the Supreme Court, but these are not the kinds of things that end up in front of the court. In other words, there's still a lot of power at the very ground level of our judicial system. We forget that. And a lot of that power belongs to the people. So don't skip jury duty if you get called.
Yeah. And get out and protest No King's Day rally on the 18th. So, because it's always up to us, and it's always going to be up to us. No one person is going to save us. No politician, no judge, no prosecutor. It's up to us. And I think we remain up to the challenge. So, Asha, thank you for jumping on again. I will probably call on you again when and if, I'm going to say when, we see John Bolton indicted.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Great seeing you. All right. Thanks,
Bye,
everybody, for
guys.
jumping on. Bye.